The Fantastic Four is a comic book movie produced by Roger Corman, often known as Roger Corman's Fantastic Four, and is the first attempt at adapting Marvel's first big success of the Atomic Age to screen. As we know now, these films have all been pretty bad, and that curse may have started here. While the original Spider-Man and X-Men films still have some reverence in this world where Marvel fans are spoiled with the MCU, the Fantastic Four from that era was a duology of films that generally doesn't hold the same reverence those films did. And the more grounded, let's say, reboot from 2015 also failed to live up to fans' expectations, so I'm sure a lot of people are happy we're getting another Fantastic Four reboot set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, even though, not every superhero film needs an expanded universe connected to it, but I digress. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. Today, I'm here to talk about the biggest pile of shit in the Fantastic Four catalog of films, which is actually saying a lot. Today we're talking about Roger Corman's Fantastic Four. As most of you know, this film was originally cancelled. It was essentially just made for Bernard Eckinger to keep the film rights to the Fantastic Four, so he teamed up with Roger Corman to shoot the thing on a tight budget of around $1 million, which is not a lot considering a film like the 2005 Fantastic Four was shot on a budget of around $100 million. Anyhow, it turned out like shit and was cancelled, to the dismay of comic fans around the world, due to this being an era where Marvel wasn't pumping out content on a literal weekly basis like we have now. Basically, what happened was Avi Arad, who would go on to produce most of the pre-MCU Marvel films and some of the MCU, heard about the film from a fan unaware that it was coming out. And he got cash together to purchase the film and essentially locked away the negatives, and I can really see why, because this was a massive dud and definitely would have cheapened the brand, which obviously Arad didn't want, as the Marvel Renaissance was right around the corner, with films like Blade, X-Men, Spider-Man, and of course 2005's Fantastic Four. Anyhow, enough with the background, let's get into the juicy plot details. The Fantastic Four is essentially what you would expect from a Fantastic Four movie. In the wake of an accident, Victor Von Doom is injured, leading him to become Dr. Doom. 10 years later, Reed is still working on the experiment that caused Victor to be injured in the first place, which was discovered to be the power of Colossus. Anyhow, like in the comics, he assembles a team, with Groom's child Sue Storm, Johnny, her brother, and Ben, a lifelong friend of Reed's, as well as a pilot. They crash land in their rocket ship, only to find they have powers now. Anyhow, they are captured by Dr. Doom, who unbeknownst to them is Victor, but they manage to escape. Meanwhile, the jeweler, who is just the mole man, but I don't think they had the rights to him, or perhaps they thought the name was too silly, captures Alicia, a girl Ben literally just bumps into at the start of the film. Anyhow, some shit happens that's boring and unimportant, and Dr. Doom tells him he'll blow up New York with his super laser if the Fantastic Four doesn't give up their powers. Oh, also, Doom kidnapped Alicia from the jeweler, who also kidnapped Alicia, so I guess the jeweler was a totally irrelevant character other than stealing the big gem of Colossus so that the Fantastic Four crashes, I guess. Okay, so they fight, and Doom seemingly falls to his death, while Johnny stops the laser that can blow up New York by shooting it with fire and then punching it, in a sequence that perhaps has some of the worst CGI I've ever seen in a film that was set for a theatrical release. Okay, so if you couldn't tell, I thought this movie was awful, and not because it was likely unfinished, but also for numerous other reasons. For one, this plot was done better in the 2005 and 2015 films, even though those films kinda sucked. One thing that really bothered me though was the music, which while I was watching, I speculated was stock music.
Hello, Reed.
But I guess it wasn't, because the composers of this film paid $6,000 out of pocket to have their creative musical vision of a 48-piece orchestra performing the music, but honestly, the music is just bland. I wouldn't have minded so much in a film like, I don't know, Air Bud, but for a superhero action film, it sounds like ass. And the movie isn't very well mixed, and the sound effects are awful too, with stock sound effects constantly being played, and when the rocket takes off, it literally is just the archival recording of the Apollo 11 liftoff countdown.
2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff, we have a liftoff. 2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff, we have a liftoff.
You're telling me they couldn't have just had some guy do that, like count down and have the rocket go? Whatever. The film that leaked is a very low quality VHS bootleg, so we don't know for sure what it would have looked like, but it had a trailer done that is a transfer to 35mm, and it certainly looks better, but still pretty bad. Ole Sasson, the director of this film, did a piss poor job, with a lot of extreme close-ups. Most of the film was shot in medium shots, and essentially not a second of well-shot footage. The clumsiness of his directing oozes off the screen. This isn't even to mention the downright awful moments, like when they beat up two doctors, and instead of just hitting them on screen, the screen ends up doing this spinning thing, which is perhaps one of the worst things I've ever seen put to film. Like, this man cannot direct action to the point that a simple thing like hitting two guys essentially needed to be hidden by this awful spin edit. The suits are comic accurate but look like total shit. That's why most mainstream comic book films don't just essentially cosplay the comics, because what looks good on the page doesn't really transfer to screen necessarily. That said, the Thing and Doctor Doom actually have pretty good costumes for the budget, and it wasn't fucking embarrassing like those onesie pajamas the main team got stuck in. The acting is also very poor, with people like Joseph Culp, who played Dr. Doom, way overacting, and people like Rebecca Stabb, who played the Invisible Woman, way underacting. The CG was distractingly bad, and all the romance shit made me roll my eyes because both the Thing and Alicia's and Sue and Reed's relationships were fast and underdeveloped. Alicia says she loves Ben before even knowing each other's name, and really, they've only had one interaction up to that point, which was him trying to save her.
I don't think we've formally met. I'm Ben Grimm. It's clobbering time.
Ben, no!
And Reed and Sue get married with no chemistry at all, with only one scene of any overt romance before the marriage happens.
I love you, Reed.
It's also really creepy because there's this pointless scene where a gray-haired Reed was hanging out with like a 9-year-old Johnny and a 15-year-old Sue at the start.
Aren't you coming with us, Reed?
No, Susan, listen, I'm sorry. I can't. I gotta get back to the lab. You okay?
I don't know what to think of my superheroes being weird sex fiends, but whatever. And again, I can't stress enough, how did Johnny know he could fly, and how did he know he could stop the super laser with his fire punch? Due to budgetary limitations, we only see Johnny go into his full flame mode once in the film. And never before does he practice flying, find out he can fly, or know the powers of his lasers. You need a scene like in Iron Man 1, where Iron Man kind of practices flying with his repulsors, something like that. I'm not expecting a ton, granted, with the budget, but, you know, it's pretty rushed. But honestly, the worst thing about this film is that it's just fucking boring. The action is poor shot, and those scenes are boring. The characters are undercooked and make no logical sense, so they're boring. And the horrible music adds an almost annoying quality, as it's just depressing or at times overly sentimental, which is not the tone of this fucking movie. All these in conjunctions make this film have a distinctly TV movie vibe, and it definitely didn't feel like it should have been released as a Hollywood film. If there are any closing remarks I can make about this movie, it's that I'm glad I've seen it. I never plan to watch it again, and if this actually came to theaters, it would be a massively boring disgrace of a film, and I can totally understand why the film was outright cancelled, because I genuinely believe there's a good chance if this film came out, we probably wouldn't see the emergence of things like the X-Men or Spider-Man in a few years' time after this film was shot.